will come to order. Without objection, the subcommittee may recess at any point. The purpose of this hearing is to hear from state and local law enforcement partners on the evolving threat landscape post 9/11. I thank the 9/11 Memorial and Museum for hosting us as we remember the tragedy that affected so many lives and changed our understanding of the threat landscape here in the United States of America and beyond. Without objection, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro, and the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maliotakis, are permitted to sit on the dais and ask questions to the witnesses. I would also like to seek unanimous consent and have Mr. Menendez also wave on to the committee. Without objection, so ordered, I recognize myself for an opening statement. I first want to thank our witnesses for participating in today's field hearing on evolving threats, security and safety in a post-9/11 world. I am humbled to be able to conduct this hearing on such sacred ground. As a lifelong New Yorker, retired NYPD detective, former chief of the Island Park Fire Department, and chairman of the Homeland Security Subcommittee on Emergency Management and Technology, I want to thank each and every one of you for your commitment to keeping our nation, our state, our city, and of course, our beloved Nassau County safe. Without you, we would be in a very different place. It is my firm belief that those serving in law enforcement, the fire service, and emergency management represent the very best of America. Our nation remains resilient thanks to your bravery and the bravery of your colleagues, their tenacity and their ability to bring order into chaos. They choose to overcome fear with courage every day, which they nobly demonstrated 22 years ago as they helped our nation respond to and recover from the deadliest attack the United States has ever seen. The terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001 shook this great nation and took the lives of almost 3,000 innocent people, lives that were taken far too soon. Our sense of safety and security was shattered, highlighting the presence of very real and a very cruel enemy. And while the tragic fall of those great towers will never be erased from our memory, we also cannot forget the unparalleled heroism and determination demonstrated by first responders and law enforcement that day. As former President George W. Bush declared in his address later that evening, we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Amid such pain and chaos, New York City's firefighters, police officers, paramedics ran towards the collapsing buildings with unforgettable courage and compassion. The world may look different than it did 22 years ago, but there is no shortage of those who seek to do harm and disrupt our way of life. From our nation's first responders to those of us serving in Congress, we each have a role to play in keeping our communities safe and protecting our right to life, liberty, and our pursuit of happiness. Following the attacks of September 11th, Congress demonstrated its commitment to national security by reforming intergovernmental coordination and terrorism prevention by creating the Department of Homeland Security. Within DHS, the Federal Emergency Management Agency's grant programs provides preparedness funding for states, local governments, and nonprofit agencies to prevent and respond to terrorist attacks, major disasters, and other emergencies. DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency leads our nation's efforts to defend against cyber threat actors that target critical infrastructure, federal, state, and local governments, the private sector, and every single individual that calls America home. The Department's Office of Intelligence and Analysis delivers intelligence information to our state, local, tribal, and territorial and private sector partners. DHS's Countering Terror Weapons of Mass Destruction Office was established to help its operational partners at the federal, state, and local level to prevent the use of weapons of mass destruction against the United States of America and promote readiness for chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. Regardless of one's position, as public servants, we must follow the example of those heroes who sacrificed their lives that day and use the authority and resources we've each been given to put the lives of our fellow Americans first. We must be vigilant in confronting new threats as well as innovative as those threats evolve. The United States Armed Forces, law enforcement, and the intelligence community has bravely fought terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, ISIS, and many others. But their radical ideologies continue to inspire violence against the West. In fact, the FBI has expressed concern about U.S.-based lone actors radicalized by jihadism and other radical ideologies. Additionally, other threats include transnational criminal organizations, which have trafficked fentanyl into the United States of America, causing more than 100,000 deaths annually. Cyber attacks and espionage also threaten our nation's hospitals, small businesses, and critical infrastructure. Furthermore, anti-Semitism and hate crimes have skyrocketed in the last 2 years. There is no doubt the evil we face is ever evolving. And although daunting, we must meet today's challenges with the same commitment to protecting those we love as those heroes who responded to the attacks on 9/11 and the brave soldiers who fought on the front lines in Afghanistan. We must be unwavering in our support of the federal and local law enforcement agencies as they intercept and disrupt terrorist plots against this great nation. And we must support our nation's network of emergency responders as they safeguard our home from unimaginable threats. As we look to the future, let us remember those who gave their lives on September 11th, 2001, and who have courageously fought to protect our freedoms. Freedom isn't free, so let us be united in our resolve to protect our businesses, our places of worship, and our way of life, all which are beacons of light in the greatest nation in the world. Thank you again to our witnesses for your commitment to peace and security. I look forward to hearing from you about your work. I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Goldman, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this hearing in this now hallowed place, the Museum and Memorial for 9/11. I also just want to take note of my colleagues who are here as well, many from New York City and the surrounding suburbs, including New Jersey suburbs, all of whose districts have been were dramatically impacted by the 9/11 attacks. And of course, I am the representative of this district, this location, and I'm very grateful that although we have very many disagreements on a number of different things, we have bipartisan unity in supporting this site, this museum, the 9/11 World Trade Center health program, to make sure that we honor our commitment to the first responders and simply pay for their health care from their illnesses that have arisen from their heroic efforts following 9/11. I also want to thank our witnesses who are here today. We appreciate all of your work responding to and preventing terrorist attacks, and are very grateful for your presence here today. I think the American people do not realize how many potential terrorist attacks are thwarted by the fine men and women in law enforcement. You don't hear about those for good reason, but I know from my former years as a federal prosecutor that they happen far more frequently than you would realize. First, Deputy Commissioner Pfeiffer, I also just want to take a special moment to extend thank you for your service. You are a hero and among the brave first responders who responded after those horrific attacks and have continued your fine service to our country. I'd also like to thank the Memorial and the Museum for hosting us today, providing the space. I've been to the museum several times. It is incredibly powerful and moving, and it is a testament to the importance of that event that we honored yesterday on the 22nd anniversary, which we will do every year as a reminder that we can never forget what happened on 9/11. We can never forget those people around the world, those groups, those organizations who do not like us because we are, as the chairman said, the beacon of light of democracy. That day is etched into our collective memory as a day that brought this nation to a standstill, a day that showed the world the worst of humanity's capacity for hatred, but also the best of our resilience and unity as a city and as a nation. And on that fateful Tuesday morning, beautiful skies, as we all remember and is commemorated in this museum, 19 terrorists hijacked 4 commercial planes, flew 2 of them into the 2 towers of the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon, and a 4th plane crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, through the heroic efforts of passengers to thwart what was expected to be an attack on our capital. Nearly 3,000 people were killed that day, and I vividly remember I lived about a mile north of here on Hudson Street, and I will never forget watching streams of people covered in soot, dust. It looked like they had literally been showered on by a white soot, walking startled, silent up the street. I will never forget the pile burning for weeks and weeks, the smell that just constantly emanated from it, the missing person signs that were put up all around downtown. None of them were ever recovered. It is a day etched in many of our memories because I know many of us here have stories to tell, and it's a day that we can never forget. I'd also like to acknowledge the survivors and families of those who lost loved ones on 9/11 and who have continued to fight every single day for the truth, justice, and care that the New York heroes so deeply deserve. And those who are still suffering from illnesses, it is troubling, to say the least, that there were 343 members of the Fire Department of New York who perished that day. And since 9/11, there are now 341 who have died from 9/11 related illnesses. Those families, those survivors, need full transparency from the city of New York and from our government to make sure that they get the proper justice, accountability, and transparency that they need. In the days and weeks following 9/11, the world watched as we came together in a display of unity and strength. And the world joined us, joined America, our allies, to share in both the grief but also the resiliency. We have transformed this area now. We have rebuilt it, as is the American way. And the strength of our resiliency is a reminder of the mandate that we have to ensure that evil never triumphs over the American spirit, that our democracy and freedoms never succumb to those who want to undermine it, both from abroad and from within. The aftermath of 9/11 reshaped how our country had dealt with terrorism and ushered in a need to strengthen our nation's national security to ensure that such events never happen again. We have enacted new laws establishing the 9/11 Commission, 22 agencies that joined together to become the Department of Homeland Security, in what was the largest reorganization of the federal government since World War II. And as we remember 9/11, we must also reflect on the lessons it imparts, which is the need to continually strengthen our homeland against terrorist attacks. 9/11 revealed significant and fundamental security challenges. For example, emergency communications challenges were identified by the 9/11 Commission as a contributing factor in the death toll. There have been vast improvements in the last 22 years, including the creation of the First Responder Network Authority in 2012, which established a single nationwide broadband specifically for first responders, broadband network. And I hope to hear today from our witnesses how advancements in technology and communications have helped to improve the city's security as well as the nation's security. Another great resource that was developed after 9/11 were the Department of Homeland Security's grant programs, which provided dedicated funding to cities like New York to help build and strengthen defenses against terrorism. We have programs now like the Urban Area Security Initiative and the State Homeland Security Grant Program to assist in ensuring that first responders have the resources they need to defend their communities. So many cities, including New York and Washington, rely on these resources. And I know my colleagues here, commit to doing everything we can to ensure that these resources remain sufficient and robust to stem any future terrorist attacks. It is my hope that we use this hearing to commemorate the memory of the victims and the bravery of the first responders. This is my home. It is an honor to be here for this hearing to discuss how we are going to keep our city, New York, strong. So let us recommit to working together, transcending our differences, and striving for a world where tragedies become relics of the past, and we work together to promote American democracy here and abroad. And I look forward to discussing all of this with our witnesses today. I thank the chairman again, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I am very pleased to have such an important panel of witnesses before us today. I ask that the witnesses please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Mr. Joseph Pfeiffer is the first Deputy Commissioner of the New York City Fire Department. Mr. Pfeiffer was the first fire chief to respond to the World Trade Center attacks on September 11th, and we certainly thank him for his bravery and heroism on that day and for being here with us today. Mr. Pfeiffer is also the founding director of the FDNY's Center for Terrorism and Disaster Preparedness. Sir, thank you very much for your service. Ms. Laura Kavanaugh is the 34th Fire Commissioner for the City of New York Fire Department. Commissioner Kavanaugh oversees administration of the agency's 17,000 employees and was a key leader for the department's responses to the 2015 Ebola outbreak, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic. Commissioner, thank you for your time and your commitment to safety. Ms. Rebecca Weiner heads the New York City Police Department's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Bureau. Deputy Commissioner Weiner has been with the NYPD since 2006 and previously served as legal counsel to the department's Intelligence Analysis Unit. She also served as the first representative of local law enforcement on the Director of National Intelligence's National Intelligence Council. Commissioner, thank you for being here. Thank you for welcoming us to 1PP earlier this month, and thank you for serving the NYPD well. Mr. Patrick Ryder is the Commissioner of the Nassau County Police Department. Commissioner Ryder has dedicated 38 years of his life to law enforcement, first starting in the NYPD in Brooklyn North, the best borough to work in. 36 of those years were with the Nassau County Police Department. Throughout his career with the Nassau County Police Department, Commissioner Ryder has implemented several programs and initiatives to ensure officer and public safety, including the creation of the Counterterrorism Unit. I will say, as a lifelong resident of Nassau County and proud to represent now in Congress, I thank Commissioner Ryder every day for his commitment to keeping Nassau County safe. Commissioner, thank you for being here. Mr. Greg Erie is the Chief Security Officer of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. He served in the United States Air Force and is a veteran of Desert Storm and gave an impressive 22 years of service to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sir, thank you for being here, thank you for your time, and thank you for your service to this great country. I thank the witnesses for being here today, and as a proud New Yorker, thank all of you for your service to the great state of New York. I now recognize First Deputy Commissioner Pfeiffer for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman D'Esposito, Ranking Member Goldman, and subcommittee members, thank you for letting me speak today and testify in this historical location on such an important topic. 22 years ago yesterday, on a bright summer day, I was a battalion chief, standing in the street with my fire units responding to an odor of gas, when suddenly I heard a loud noise of a plane coming overhead and flying so low that I could read the words American on the fuselage. Then I saw the plane aim and crash into the World Trade Center. In a flash, I knew this was no accident, but a terrorist attack, and thousands of people were in their greatest moment of need. I was the first fire chief to arrive at the World Trade Center, and with my firefighters and first responders, we looked at the burning building and knew we were going to the most dangerous fire of our lives. Without hesitation, firefighters approached me and asked, "Chief, what do you need?" And I directed them, "Go up, evacuate everybody, and rescue those that couldn't get out." 17 minutes after the first attack, a second plane crashed into the South Tower. And within 60 minutes, a third plane would crash into the Pentagon and a fourth into the fields in Pennsylvania. Then the unthinkable happened. I heard a loud rumbling sound of the 110-story World Trade Center towers collapsing to the ground. And in bunker gear, you don't run too far or too fast in 11 seconds. And then this beautiful summer day turned completely dark in a cloud of crumbled concrete and twisted steel. And I couldn't see the hand in front of my face. And I wondered in that moment if I was still alive. In 102 minutes, our world changed forever as we witnessed the mass murder of nearly 3,000 people, including 343 of my firefighters, one of whom was my brother. In the aftermath, the 9/11 Commission report identified several critical changes that municipalities to improve intergovernmental, interagency communications and coordination. The fire department embraced that mandate to adapt to the threat of terrorism by enhancing emergency response capabilities. We conducted an in-depth after-action review and strategized ways to make improvements. We created a state-of-the-art fire department operations center located at FDNY headquarters. It enables senior leaders to manage complex emergencies by seamlessly sharing information and coordinating with local partners like the New York City Police Department, the New York City Emergency Management, and other city agencies, as well as state and federal partners. One significant development from our post-9/11 discussions is FDNY's creating a Center for Terrorism and Disaster Preparedness. Through information gathering, intelligence analysis, and coordination with government partners, the center enabled the department to understand the risk better and prepare to respond to terrorist attacks, natural disasters, and extreme events. Members of the center created emergency response plans, developed strategies to prepare for emerging threats. This includes working with NYPD Emergency Management to establish operational roles and train for terrorist attacks and other complex events. We have worked diligently to strengthen the interagency relationships via training with other agencies. We have bolstered communication, enabling us to share voice, video, and data to effectively manage situational awareness and coordination. This includes frequently engaging with state and federal partners, such as the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, surrounding counties, the United States Coast Guard, the National Guard, the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, the Federal Aviation Administration, to just name a few. Another lesson from 9/11 was the fire department needed to increase capability and capacity. A good example of this was FDNY's Marine units for water operations. Before 9/11, our Marine Division was comprised primarily of 60-year-old fireboats designed to respond to boat and pier fires along the waterway. We now have built marine operations into a robust fleet of boats on various sizes and capabilities designed for a tiered response to all types of emergencies. We acquired 2 140-foot vessels, 2 medium-sized 60-foot vessels with more maneuverability, and a variety of small boats capable of responding to emergencies. We built our new fireboats to deal with terrorist threats against critical infrastructures, such as bridges, and to be a regional asset. I'm sure you remember the miracle in the Hudson, with passengers standing on the wings of United Airways, U.S. Airways, floating down the Hudson River. Our fireboats rescued many of those passengers. We also built the capabilities to repair those boats more quickly. Thankfully, no subsequent terrorist attacks in New York City has created such destruction as we saw on 9/11 of the World Trade Center. However, as this subcommittee is well aware of, the city continues to experience acts of terrorism and mass violence. In recent years, the fire department and our partners have responded to multiple terrorist attacks. This has included individuals attempting to detonate a pipe bomb in a narrow subway corridor, a bomb fashioned from a pressure cooker set to explode in a suitcase in Chelsea's neighborhood of the Lower Manhattan, and terrorists who drove a truck down the West Side Highway and crowded bike path and hit people and pedestrians and hit a school bus. Last year, the city experienced a mass shooting in the subway in Brooklyn involving a smoke grenade and handguns that injured 29 people. Since 9/11, FDNY training has involved, including focusing on responding to active shooter incidents. Using federal fundings, we've created a counterterrorism rescue task force, selecting EMS and fire personnel, undergoing extensive training with our colleagues from NYPD. In an active shooter response, police aggressively subdue the shooter while another police team creates a warm zone in which EMS and firefighters provide life-saving care to victims under NYPD force protection. Patients needing care are then rushed to the hospitals. We call this dual mission stopping the killing and stopping the dying. The threat environment is changing as terrorism evolved and new methods of attack. We analyzed innovative threats and prepared to counter them with our security partners through an information sharing network. FDNY's Center for Terrorism and Disaster Preparedness has written intel documents and trained with members to confront the threat of vertical terrorism in high-rise buildings where fire and smoke are used as weapons. Potential innovative attacks may also involve targeting large energy storage battery systems. We are working with the private sector to safeguard these facilities. We have also taken proactive approaches involving cyber threats. To do so, we have leveraged Homeland Security funding to build a variety of in-house resources and tools for security testing, firewalls, intrusion detection, and prevention. We have also explored ways to conduct incident management of a cyber attack with physical consequences. Finally, we do not limit our preparation to responding to threats brought about by deliberate acts of terrorism. As an integral part of Homeland Security that fire departments such as the FDNY must confront is one of climate security. National disasters have devastating effects here in New York City and around the world. Recent history has shown more frequent and more powerful events. During Hurricane Sandy, the fire department faced many emergencies across the city. We responded to water rescues, flooding where people were trapped, and thousands of downed trees and utility lines and scattered debris, along with various medical emergencies, and the largest residential fire in FDNY's history. As luck would have it, I was the first chief at that fire. We have seen recent examples of climate-driven disasters causing widespread destruction, such as the wildfires in Maui, flooding in New England, and similar events in locations throughout the country. Municipalities need your help to prepare for these events, to reduce the death toll and the skyrocketing property costs. Climate security is an essential element of Homeland Security that we are incorporating into our preparedness. In conclusion, I want to thank the committee for your time and interest in these critical issues. We are here at the 9/11 Memorial Museum as a sign of resilience, to reflect on the past and envision the future so we can enhance the present. Tragic events can be challenging to talk about, but with these stories comes a responsibility to improve response operations to save lives. I am grateful to congressional members here today and your colleagues for ensuring that these discussions continue and for providing the department like FDNY with the tools to do our best in these dangerous situations. Through your support, we will turn traumatic memories into hope and greater national preparedness and security. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Pfeiffer. I just want to remind your opening statements will be submitted for the record. If we could try to just summarize the opening statements, keep it to 5 minutes. Again, Mr. Pfeiffer, thank you so much for your service. I now recognize Commissioner Kavanaugh for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I think as you heard from Commissioner Pfeiffer's testimony, the New York City Fire Department suffered the ultimate tragedy 22 years ago, but is... Oh. It's the ultimate sign of resilience, including Commissioner Pfeiffer's decision to come back and continue serving like so many of our members have. One way that we can honor those who have fallen is to protect and nourish those who've survived. Many of our members are suffering World Trade Center health conditions, as the chairman mentioned today. And for our responders who now suffer from cancer, our data shows that those receiving treatment through the World Trade Center Health Program live longer than cancer patients in New York State who were never exposed to the World Trade Center. Remarkably, 5 years after a cancer diagnosis, 86% of responders are still with us today. Despite its success, we were forced to continually fight to maintain funding for this program. In July, the Senate approved necessary funding for the World Trade Center Health Program as part of the National Defense Authorization Act. We are hopeful that the House will approve it as well. As First Deputy Commissioner Pfeiffer poignantly highlighted, one quality that has always strengthened the fire department is our ability to learn from experience and improve, and our ability to have federal funds is integral to continuing that improvement. A couple of things that I'd like to highlight on that. We are the premier fire department in the country. That means that we are a regional and a national asset. We are proud that our fellow first responders from across the continent look to us for innovation. We gladly share our knowledge and best practices. For example, recently we received requests from various municipalities about our advanced drone and robotics program. Using federal dollars, we've gone from a single tethered drone to a fleet of drones and robotic devices that we regularly use at the scene of emergency operations. We were the first fire department in the country to use a drone. We've continued pushing the technology forward, working directly with the FAA to improve processes for departments like ours. Initially, drones were just static observational devices, but we now employ these drones and robotic devices as tactical tools that save lives of first responders. For example, in April, we deployed our robotic dog to search for signs of life in a parking garage collapse. And this summer, we used the drones to analyze a construction crane that had caught fire and dangled 45 stories above 10th Avenue. We also use these regularly at fires and emergencies on a daily basis. We have also transformed into a regional and national asset. That includes a 285-member incident management team that manages and coordinates emergencies across the country. This concept, which came out of the wake of 9/11, allows the department to send talented emergency managers nationally and even internationally to provide assistance. Some examples just this year: the Ridge Creek Forest Fire in Oregon, the wildfires in Quebec in Canada. We also formed the FDNY's Urban Search and Rescue Team, which is specialized teams that are trained to carry out life-saving operations in complex environments. They have been deployed to New England to assist in search and rescue operations during severe flooding. They have also gone to Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and to help with hurricane responses across the country. We frequently deploy search and rescue teams, including in recent years, to Louisiana, Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, Puerto Rico, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Texas, as well as several islands in the Caribbean. Finally, we are grateful for every dollar of federal funding that we receive, and we appreciate the attention paid to this issue by members of the Subcommittee and the Committee on Homeland Security. We believe it is critical to allow grant funds to be used for training as well for management and administrative costs. There is great value in purchasing tangible, innovative equipment, and we do a lot of that. But as a grant recipient, we also put a priority on making sure that we track and administer grant dollars appropriately and efficiently. We do great lengths to be good stewards of federal funds. Having the equipment is only one part of the equation. The other is being certain that FDNY personnel can expertly deploy it at the appropriate moment. That is only possible when their training is current and substantial. I also want to stress the importance of keeping funding tied to risk. The number of cities eligible for UASI funding has grown, and while I would never discourage the government from allocating funds to other cities, it is important that areas of the country where the risk is greatest are able to access federal funding to successfully manage that risk. Cities like New York have a great need for Homeland Security funding, as I hope First Deputy Commissioner Pfeiffer and I have demonstrated today. We greatly appreciate the partners that we have in this room. Your support and the support of your colleagues in Congress has enabled the department to modernize, innovate, and equip ourselves to keep pace with the evolving set of challenges that we face. Sometimes those innovations are the result of very difficult days, but I am grateful to live in a country that works together to ensure that an attack like 9/11 can never happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I now recognize Deputy Commissioner Weiner for her opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you all. Good morning. Thank you so much to
Good morning.
Chairman D'Esposito and Ranking Member Goldman and all of you here today. On behalf of Police Commissioner Edward A. Caban and Mayor Eric Adams, I want to thank you for having me today. 22 years ago, the attacks that we have all been discussing happened in this hallowed space. A lot has happened since, and our terrorism landscape manifests very differently today. However, the threat is no less proximate, and it is no less concerning, and it requires our collaboration absolutely intensively. Today's threat environment in New York City is more dynamic, more diffuse, and unpredictable than ever. What hasn't changed, however, is that the city remains a singularly priority target due to its unique draw of iconic locations, high-profile events, and a vibrantly diverse population. Since 9/11, violent extremists and malicious actors across the ideological spectrum have targeted New York City in over 50 disrupted plots and attacks, and Commissioner Pfeiffer mentioned a couple of them earlier, from foreign terrorist organizations and the individuals they inspire, to adversarial nation states, to domestic violent extremists and lone actors motivated by a wide range of grievances, including racial and ethnic hate, anti-government extremism, and conspiracy theories. In 2022 alone, there were 8 terroristic incidents in the greater New York area, which demonstrate the diversity and the range of threats we encounter. I'll touch on some of these briefly in the interest of time, but they're enumerated at greater length in my written submission for the record. The year began with 2 incidents motivated in part by race-based conspiracy theory, the assassination of 2 of our officers in January of 2022, and, as was mentioned, a mass shooting on the subway in Brooklyn. During that summer, 2 incidents took place within weeks of one another, with links to the government of Iran and the ideology that the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force inspires, an assassination plot against a Brooklyn-based women's rights activist, and a brutal attack against author Salman Rushdie upstate. There was, of course, the horrific attack targeting the Black community in Buffalo, carried out by a racially and ethnically motivated violent extremist, and a disrupted plot against a New York City synagogue last fall by an adherent to a neo-Nazi ideology. The year ended with a jihadist attack against 3 of our officers just outside the security perimeter in Times Square as revelers were gathered to support the new year. Compounding these issues are public safety risks that are newer to us. In particular, I wanted to flag those associated with emerging technology, artificial intelligence, generative AI. Generative AI offers clear and present risks, the proliferation of disinformation and deepfakes at scale and at cost, bot-generated and voice-cloned threats, scams, and swatting campaigns, lower barriers to entry for the creation of malware, phishing, and other cyber threat vectors, the provision of targeting and tactical guidance, which we've started to see online, and even the potential creation of novel illicit narcotics, explosive compounds, or bioweapons. We're only just beginning as a law enforcement collective to understand the public safety implications of emerging technology, and generative AI is only one dimension of the challenge. It's important to note that we can't keep New Yorkers safe without critical partnerships with the federal government, and this occurs at every level with every agency. We participate in numerous task forces with federal agencies, from the Joint Terrorism Task Force to the Counterintelligence Task Force to fusion centers. Every day, we gather federal, state, and local counterparts to focus our resources on drivers of gun violence in this city through our Gun Violence Strategies Partnership. And while these active partnerships are critical, funding our local counterterrorism efforts is equally important, particularly given competing priorities that have begun to stretch the resources of many agencies today. The NYPD expects to receive $123 million in Homeland Security grants from the federal government during fiscal year 2023, vitally important funds. These funds are integral to our public safety mission and should be allocated based on risk. New York City remains the priority target in this country. We use these resources to provide equipment and training to our counterterrorism officers deployed around the city and to support our critical response command, a specially trained and equipped group of officers who you probably saw upstairs as you were walking in, who deploy throughout the city based on intelligence, protecting people, infrastructure, and events, deterring and detecting acts of terrorism and targeted violence. We rely on this funding to acquire chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear explosive detection equipment that we use around the city, and to support our intelligence analysis efforts to detect and deter threats. We depend on it to maintain our domain awareness system, an important intelligence sharing tool. Cuts to these vital funding streams will imperil these programs at a time that many of our partners are struggling with competing challenges, priority challenges as well, outside of the counterterrorism domain, such as Russia's war in Ukraine, rising threats posed by the CCP, and other priorities. Lastly, we wanted to highlight a lesser-known element of our counterterrorism response, which is our partnership with the Federal Park Service. For years, the Federal Park Service has allowed the NYPD to house our counterterrorism unit, aviation division, special operations division, and emergency services unit at Floyd Bennett Field. Grouping these units together in one location allows us to properly train for and rapidly respond to emergency situations where every second counts. Our lease recently expired, and we've been working collaboratively with the Parks Department to extend it. No agreement has yet been reached, and there is simply no other place in New York City that can provide the same space and access. We appreciate the support that several of you and your colleagues have provided in helping broker an agreement that would allow us to maintain our footprint there. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I will be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Deputy Commissioner Weiner. I now recognize Nassau County Police Commissioner Patrick Ryder for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this committee for giving us the opportunity to speak here today. The opportunity to give our victims a voice, and the opportunity to let law enforcement and all first responders know there are still people that are out there in government that support us in our battles every day. I am going to start my 41st year this January, and I too am a first responder down at Ground Zero. I woke up that morning, my father-in-law, retired FDNY, was standing there watching my 3 kids. They were newly born triplets in their bouncies. And he was watching the TV, staring in silence. I walked down, I'm putting my tie on, and he says, something bad happened. And he knew, that instinct took over. He knew it was going to be a bad day for the FDNY. The second plane hit, he just tapped me on his shoulder and he said, go. And go we went, like every first responder did. Without question, without hesitation, go. And I remember going down the West Side Highway on day 2. It took a while to put some supplies that were donated by the communities. And we drove down the West Side Highway. We dropped them off at the Intrepid. And as I'm pulling down, the dust that was kicking up behind the cars in front of me, now knowing that was the DNA of our loved ones that were down crushed in those buildings by that terrorist attack. And as we went down even further, there were signs being held up, thanking us, supporting us, sending their love and praise to us. And I knew that moment that no matter what you take from us, you will never take the will of the people. Not the will of the great people of the state of New York or anywhere in this country. That they all stood together, united, like we do in our pledge, united together to fight. And I got down and I pulled up, and I remember walking up to the first pile, and it was gigantic. I couldn't imagine anything so big in my life. And I met a cop there, Gary Wall. Gary Wall was a Limerick police officer. Gary was filthy dirty. We just pulled up. And I remember him saying, Gary, how long you been here? I've been here since yesterday. My brother Glenn was in Tower 1. He worked for Cantor. Glenn was my best friend growing up. That was my first attachment to someone dying in the towers. And then everybody climbed on that hill, can by can, handing down, hoping that they'd find somebody. And then when somebody yelled out, quiet, you got thousands of people to be absolutely silent to hear if somebody was knocking on a pipe. And then crawling through one of the tunnels, I'm about 100 yards in, and the first time ever I understood what the 3 blasts from a horn in the fire truck means. Get out, something's bad. And you can't turn around. The tunnel's 2.5, 3 feet round. And I'm backing out 100 yards on my knees. My brother-in-law grabs me, and we just start to run. The building stopped shaking, back on the pile. That day I met a man I'll never forget, and he's to this day one of the smartest academic minds I've ever met, Chauncey Parker, with the NYPD as a deputy commissioner and also the director of the New York, New Jersey HIDA. And he said to me, he goes, Pat, this was a complete failure of the intelligence sharing community, a complete failure. He goes, we have to do more if we're going to go forward. The next day, we started developing what was called the HIDA RICS, and Nassau County was one of the first to have a regional intelligence center. HIDA stands for the high intensity drug trafficking areas. And we started sharing and building partnerships that grew and grew every day. Just this past week, we've connected to cameras and license plate readers through the NYPD, through the FDNY. The partnerships are invaluable. But I live in a state that is now trying to take away the rights from law enforcement of flying our drones, as you just heard the testimony, and how important they are to saving lives. And the first persons they come after are law enforcement. We're overreaching. We're sending up drones that are unmanned, and we're watching, Big Brother looking down. No, this is Big Brother trying to protect you. The same Big Brother that ran in those buildings that morning of 9/11. The same Big Brothers that were crushed in those buildings that day trying to rescue those people. We are challenged every day when it comes to technology, whether it's drones, whether it's artificial intelligence, facial recognition, our license plate reader program. These things are invaluable to us. But every day, my great state of New York tries to take more and more away from me. This is how we defend you. This is how we defend our victims. This is how we give them a voice. I got no notes in front of me because a guy told me a long time ago, if you speak about what you're passionate about, you don't have to write it down. Speak from the heart. And that's coming from the heart. You heard the testimony. I just watched the special with Chief Pfeiffer on it the other day. It brings me to tears 22 years later. And too many people were lost that day because we failed. We won't fail again. Not the people on this side of the table. We will not fail again. Bad guy has to be right once. We have to be right every single time. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for giving our victims a voice.
Thank you, Commissioner Ryder. I now recognize Mr. Erie for his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman. Yes. Thank you.
You got it. See the partnership?
Always together. My name is Greg Erie, and I am the Chief Security Officer for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. Like many of my fellow witnesses, I was also 22 years ago here at Ground Zero as a first responder during my service with the FBI. I appreciate the opportunity to come before the subcommittee today and talk about these very important critical issues. The Port Authority of New York and New Jersey is a vast multimodal transportation agency that builds, operates, and maintains infrastructure, including 5 airports, 2 tunnels, the Lincoln and Holland, 4 bridges, the Port Authority bus terminal, the PATH rail system that connects New York and New Jersey, the ports of New York and New Jersey, and the iconic 16-acre World Trade Center complex where you now sit. Port Authority facilities have the unfortunate distinction of being targeted multiple times by terrorists. In 1975, an explosive device was detonated at the TWA baggage reclaim at LaGuardia Airport that killed 11 and injured 74. In 1993, a truck bomb was detonated beneath the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, killing 6 and injuring over 1,000 people. On September 11th, the Port Authority lost 84 employees, including 37 police officers responding to Ground Zero and saving countless lives. This gives us an unfortunate distinction of being the police department that faced the single worst loss of life of any department in the United States. In 2017, as Chief Pfeiffer mentioned, in an MTA corridor at the doorstep of the Port Authority bus terminal, a would-be suicide bomber partially detonated an IED, injuring 4 people, including himself. 2 decades after 9/11, the transportation sector continues to be an attractive target of terrorism. Particularly acute are the Port Authority's high throughput assets that are critical to the nation and the region. As we operate the nation's largest airport system, the busiest bus terminal, and the most traveled bridge in the country. This legacy has resulted in a tireless commitment to safety and security to protect our facilities and those who depend on them. This is evident as security accounts for 26% of the agency's personnel and 26% of our operating budget. Additionally, since 9/11, $1.7 billion has been invested in capital projects to harden and strengthen existing facilities. The Port Authority employs a risk-based, multi-layer security approach to protect employees, customers, and transportation assets. We protect Port Authority transportation by performing all hazard risk assessments to understand the current threat landscape. Our assessments look across all agency assets and prioritize our risks so that we can better guide our security investments. In doing so, we have enhanced both physical and operational security, hardened our assets, and improved agency-wide resiliency. We make investments in capital security projects that are based on our risk assessment findings and complete projects that preserve life and safeguard our facilities. These projects include the hardening of our underwater tunnels, strengthening of bridge suspender ropes, the hardening of bridge towers and building columns, installation of bollards to prevent the use of vehicle-borne IEDs at our facilities, and enhancement to airport perimeter fencing and guard booths. We also deploy best-in-class security technology solutions. We have a dedicated security technology department that focuses on researching, evaluating, and deploying proven technology solutions across our facilities. Additionally, we are an active participant in the New York City Mayor's Office Security Technology Task Force to collaborate with our local partners on cutting-edge technological solutions. We maintain a robust cybersecurity program that provides a broad array of cyber defenses, to include a 24/7 dedicated cybersecurity operations center and other cyber centers. We deploy a highly trained and well-equipped counterterrorism-focused police force, members of who you see before you today. The Port Authority Police Department has over 2,100 police officers who maintain a 24/7 presence at our facilities. Since 2001, the PAPD uniform staff has grown significantly to respond to new terrorism threat landscapes. In addition to routine uniform patrols, our policing deployments include high-visibility counterterrorism teams and emergency service units, explosive detection canine units, radiological and chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear capability deployments, vehicle checkpoints and commercial vehicle inspectors, and bag, bus, and path train inspections. Additionally, we have a contract security guard force who are trained in behavioral recognition techniques and counterterrorism awareness. These security officers are posted at locations throughout our facilities and staff a 24/7 security operations center. The Port Authority also has its own Office of Emergency Management that leads our agency-wide business continuity program and executes training and full-scale exercises. These training and exercise programs integrate our regional first responders and focus on the incident command system and unified command principles, active shooter response, rail emergencies, aircraft incidents, acts of terrorism, and other natural and human-made hazards. We also maintain, like many of my witnesses stated before me, local, state, and federal partnerships to enhance situational awareness of the current and emerging threats facing our region. Our investigators have a presence on task forces to include the New York and New Jersey FBI JTTFs. The Port Authority collaborates with the DHS Office of Science and Technology, DHS Office of Health Affairs and BioWatch program, as well as the DoD Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. These partnerships have led to the development and piloting of a variety of security technology programs at the Port Authority. We also conduct quality assurance inspections and seek independent third-party review. The Port Authority regularly audits its security programs to proactively identify and mitigate issues before our adversaries can exploit them. An essential component to the implementation of this multi-layered security approach is federal grant funding. The Port Authority does not receive tax revenue from New York or New Jersey, but relies primarily on revenue generated from facility operations. That being said, and considering the COVID-19 pandemic impacts to agency revenue, federal grants are critical to the continuation of our security programs. In 2023, the Port Authority received $13.5 million in federal grant funding from the DHS FEMA Transit Security Grant Program, the UASI program, and the Port Authority, or the Port Security Grant Program. FEMA grant funding has long supported Port Authority security initiatives to include counterterrorism programs, police training and equipment, emergency preparedness training and exercises, facility hardening, and strengthening projects. Furthermore, the Port Authority received $2 million in grant funding through the body-worn camera program through DOJ. This funding allows us to outfit our police department with body-worn camera technology and will help enhance accountability and provide transparency to the communities we serve. We appreciate Congress's past support of federal security grant funding and ask that you continue to fund these vital programs. They are essential to the Port Authority's financial ability to maintain safety and security of our facilities and implement initiatives to address the challenges of the ever-evolving threat landscape. In closing, I would like to thank all the members of the subcommittee and our congressional delegation for their unwavering support that allows us to better serve our employees and customers and better protect our regional assets and infrastructure. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Erie. Before we get into questioning, I just want to point out, as I look around, there was a reason why we wanted to have this hearing here at the 9/11 Museum, and we wanted to make sure that those who visited this hallowed ground could be part of this. And as we look around, we see people visiting the 9/11 Museum. And I just want to point out to all of you here, whether you are proud New Yorkers or whether you're visiting from any corner across this nation, many days you may watch the mainstream media and see a very divided government. Division in Washington, division amongst parties. I just want to be very clear that on this dais, you have members of the United States House of Representatives from many corners of this great nation, representing both sides of the aisle. But this morning, we are not Democrats or Republicans. We are here as Americans. And this is your government at work. And we are united, not divided, united in funding innovation and education and equipment, fighting for the health care of 9/11 survivors, and most importantly, keeping us and our first responders safe. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Deputy Commissioner Weiner, you mentioned it briefly in your opening remarks, but I think if you could perhaps give us 2 to 3 minutes, can you give us a sense, and I know that this was something that we discussed when we had met a few weeks ago, and I think for everyone to hear, especially my colleagues, is of super importance. Can you give us a sense of the threat that foreign terrorist groups pose today and how it has changed over the past 20 years?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. This is an enduring threat. It's a persistent threat. And as I mentioned, though it manifests differently today than it did on September 12th, 2001, it's a threat that we have arrayed tremendous resources and need to continue to array tremendous resources to combat. Al-Qaeda and ISIS continue to inspire homegrown violent extremists across the country and here in our area of responsibility in New York every day. This continues through propaganda, this continues through plotting, this continues through the investigations that we collectively with our federal, state, and local counterparts across the country carry out to make sure that it doesn't manifest in violence on our streets. This is in addition to threats posed by nation states. I mentioned Iran briefly earlier, but the emboldened Iran and activities targeting dissidents here in our city, targeting former U.S. officials in threat streams are of great concern to us at the NYPD and in concert with our federal partners. The nexus to international terrorism remains strong, and it will continue to do so. The programs that we've just described are put into place to ensure that collectively we can meet threats where they emanate from before they materialize here on our streets.
Thank you very much. One of the things that Mr. Goldman mentioned in his opening remarks was about FEMA's nonprofit security grant program. Commissioner Ryder is charged with protecting one of the largest Jewish populations across this nation, and I am honored to represent that same population. The nonprofit security grant program provides funding support for target hardening and other physical security enhancements and activities to nonprofit organizations that are at high risk of a terrorist attack. In New York alone, anti-Semitic attacks have increased by 39% from 2021 to 2022, reaching a record high. Commissioner, have you observed the use of the nonprofit security grant program within Nassau County's large Jewish community?
Yes, we have. So in Nassau County, we've been very fortunate that we reach out to all of our schools. We have 56 school districts, 450 buildings. We have over 100 yeshivas that are out there, and synagogues and houses of worship. Every one of them has received an assessment from the Nassau County Police Department. Our Homeland Security Office has done the security assessment with them. We've advanced their security as far as given the RAVE app, which is a response app that we use in Nassau County. It's in every one of our institutions, and also the hardening of that security, putting in the ballards, putting parking conditions, lighting, anything that would make it a safer, as we call them, the person trap in the front of the building. So we've done a lot with our leaders, both from the religious side and the school side, but we always can do more, and they can always use more funding.
So do you believe that the nonprofit security grant program has been successful?
It's been invaluable. It really has. And it's sometimes not waiting for that, but that perception of security is so important to those people that go to pray on the Sabbath or on a Sunday or Friday at a mosque. They want to make sure that they feel secure when they go to pray. So the fact that we put these security measures in place is important, but the intelligence side is probably more important.
So just to stick on that for one moment, in Nassau County, it has been successful because I think the lines of communication have been great, and you have been at the forefront of making sure that it's implemented. What can we do as members of Congress from all walks of this country to make sure that local police departments, as well as the larger ones, have the same resources that you are utilizing in Nassau County?
Well, supply and demand. Where is it needed the most? You know, look, nobody is a bigger target than the New York City area, and we know that. And that's why we have 5 of their detectives that sit in my intel center to share intelligence back and forth. But when it comes to the technology and the support of the public side, there's a foundation out there that has to start at home with the kids and stuff, where we're starting to teach our children about anti-Semitism and hate. It's not spent enough time of building that foundation with them. Then they grow into those people that become those that want to target us. The more we spread that wealth throughout the country, it is important. But there's needs that are in some places a lot less than it would be in, like the greater New York City area.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I now recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just note that I have also heard from my constituents the nonprofit security grant program has been invaluable. The president's budget recommended an increase of $55 million to $360 million. Unfortunately, the House Appropriations Homeland Security amount that has been proposed is much less than that. It's only $315 million. So I hope that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle can address that discrepancy and boost it to what the president demanded so that it can continue its success. Deputy Commissioner Weiner, I appreciate your comments about the international terrorist threats, but you also mentioned in your opening statement domestic terrorism, which has grown pretty significantly in recent years. Can you talk about how that threat has evolved over the past several years?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So this certainly has been an area of growth across the country, and including in New York City. You can look at an event that tragically took place very recently in Jacksonville, Florida, or I mentioned earlier the Buffalo attack, for important reminders of how that threat can manifest. Individuals who are often radicalized in a different way than we see among those who are inspired by Al-Qaeda or ISIS, spending a lot of time in the digital sphere. The online environment and technology has been studied very intensively, has played a role in radicalizing and mobilizing individuals to violence across the ideological spectrum, but very much to include domestic violent extremism. It's a label that includes a broad category of people who are motivated by different grievances, but uniting them all is hatred. Hatred against particular ethnic groups, particular races, anti-government extremism, and really important as we think about the sacrifice that so many of our colleagues have made on 9/11 and years subsequent, about the role of law enforcement officers as targets for domestic violent extremists. And this has been true in recent years in a number of different examples. What we call accelerationist, or is one manifestation of race-based sort of conspiracy, as well as racially and ethnically motivated extremism. And you see a lot of hallmarks of different attacks, the creation of manifestos that are disseminated online, a lot of online kudos for attackers that have come before attackers. We see this as a transnational threat, not just a domestic threat. And here I think we've done a lot of work collectively in thinking through the difference between international and domestic terrorism. These are elements that are growing. They are fueled by conspiracy, they are fueled by disinformation, and they are really at their basis animated in hate, and something that we've provided a lot of resources to trying to address. We created a unit, our racially and ethnically motivated extremist task force in 2019, to do a lot of the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we have applied in the context of international terrorism, but focused on this rising threat, with funding that we are grateful for from your committee, funding from our grants that focus on training and equipping officers, intelligence analysts, and investigators to understand this element of the threat just as much as we've resourced understanding the international terrorism environment.
You also mentioned the prevalence of disinformation, misinformation, AI, deep fakes. I'm going to combine two questions into one. You know, addressing both that, I would appreciate understanding a little bit more. And then also, what can we in Congress, what can the federal government do more to both help combat disinformation, and I'd like for you to talk about why it's dangerous, but also to combat domestic violent extremism?
Absolutely. So we are staring down the barrel of a pretty fraught and contentious election season coming up. And Chairman Diaz-Bazito, I'm so grateful that you reinforced the united nature of this hearing and your subcommittee. Disinformation is in many ways operating like a toxic sap that is hardening and dividing our individuals here, our citizens, and this is occurring in many ways. But our focus at the NYPD and in our bureau is understanding the ways in which people are consuming information that may be deliberately used sometimes by foreign adversaries. And I think about the case of Russia and election interference as a good example of disinformation that's intentionally disseminated into our online environment in order to divide us. So that's an area where we as local law enforcement need to understand the threat. We need the resources to try to combat it, and whether that is intelligence analytical support that is again funded federally, whether those are tools that can be used to identify when information is not grounded in reality. This is going to become increasingly important in the era of generative artificial intelligence, where creating information that is inauthentic is democratized to anyone who chooses to do so. And so our abilities to detect that inauthenticity become really important. And these are new priority areas for us to invest in going forward as the threats continue to evolve.
Thank you. The gentleman's time's expired. I now recognize the gentleman from New York and my fellow Long Islander, Mr. LaLota.
Thank you, Chairman. We said we never forget that 22 years ago we were attacked by folks motivated by hatred and envy for our great nation, that our innocent friends and family who merely went to work that day, riding a subway, a train, maybe they drove in, perished that day. We said we never forget the first responders and civilians who rushed towards danger, knowing it might be fateful for them to save innocent people, did so valiantly. We said we never forget the troops who were deployed in 2 decades afterwards to ensure this country remains safe. And the first responders who are still on watch today in this city and beyond to ensure we remain safe. We said we would never forget. And as I look to my left and to my right, and this point has been hit a little bit on the bipartisan nature of this panel, but it's not just New York and New Jersey members. The gentleman to my right is from Alabama, 2 to my right is from Oklahoma. I hope that we personify Congress's commitment to ensuring that this city remains safe, that we fight our enemies as far abroad as we can, that we identify the issues which would put our people into danger, and that we don't forget, and that we here are committed to ensuring that we give you the resources, the tools, the policies, the rhetoric, things that we can do to ensure that you can do your jobs effectively. And I appreciate you all being here today and the work that you do every day. My dad was a cop and his dad was a cop. My brother served in the Marines and I was in the Navy. This is a team effort that you see before you, and we appreciate your dedication and support to our common constituents. Yesterday, I visited Persistent Systems on Midtown West, about 26th Street, and they produced for the military and first responders communications gear, things that, Deputy Commissioner, you talked about in your opening statement, things that share data and voice and video in near real-time and real-time capacities. And Commissioner, you hit this when you spoke as well. This was a failure 22 years ago of intelligence sharing, of communication sharing. We didn't know the things that we needed to know 22 years ago to thwart this incident, nor to respond to it in a maximum capacity. And I appreciate collectively your efforts to get better at this. Deputy Commissioner, my first question is to you, sir. You mentioned this in your opening statement, the improvements we've made in those sorts of communications, data sharing, voice sharing, video sharing. Can you explain in about a minute or so into greater detail, sir, as to the advancements that you've made and to the extent that you share, the FDNY shares with Port Authority, NYPD, or other agencies, that your equipment is interoperable with them, that your tactics, techniques, and procedures are compatible with other agencies? Can you tell me, sir, what advances we've made in the last 22 years?
We made a lot of advances in the last 22 years. We share radio frequencies. We share video. Into our emergency operations center, there's a live feed video from NYPD helicopters. I certainly would have loved to have seen that 22 years ago, but we do it now. And we've also worked with the private sector, getting live feed videos from their helicopters. We work with the Port Authority. Not long after 9/11, there was a threat against the bridges, particularly the George Washington Bridge. And I sat at a law enforcement meeting, and just imagine this meeting, a whole bunch of police and one fire guy in the back. And I raised my hand and I said, how do you collapse a bridge? And nobody knew. And then the Port Authority invited me into a meeting next day with the engineers. And we sat down, Port Authority, NYPD, FDNY, and we found out how that would occur. And then I gave them some ideas, and then we changed procedures.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I'm going to interrupt you real quickly because my time is running out. Would you, sir, commit to working with our offices to let us know what more the federal government can do to ensure that we continue to communicate and collaborate?
Absolutely. We need to work together, and we need to do it in a physical but also through technology and sharing digitally.
I appreciate that commitment. Commissioner, my last few moments are for you, sir. There's no mistake why DESPO respects you so much. Your statement fired me up and has me focused even more so on this issue. I want to give you a moment to maybe discuss a little bit more about our state's policies and how they affect your job, especially how they negatively affect your job as it pertains, sir, to recruitment and retention. What have current policies in this state done for your department's recruitment and retention, sir?
Understand that law enforcement is not perfect. We've made mistakes, 100%. And after reform that changed, justice reform that came in when it came to discovery information and bail reform, and then we get the blame of why crime is continuing. Well, the crime is continuing because we don't keep bad people where they belong, and that's in jail. So laws need to get refocused back where they were. They did some adjustments for us when it came to the bail reform, but on the discovery side, the work that is done, especially when it comes to technology, every camera, every video, every body camera, all has to be turned over within that 14-day period, or we're dismissing charges, and that's what's happening. So when it comes to the technology side of things, extracting that information and turning it over to defense counsel, he has more rights now than our victims do. And unfortunately, we get the burden of trying to pick up that slack without funding it. They've made they've made mandates that are unfunded, and that's the problem that we're going through. The size of the discovery people and the analysts that are now hired to extract that information, nobody's picking up the tab. So when you look at the laws, and now, again, they're now looking to go after restricting the flights of unmanned drones. There are thousands of drones in the air every single day that civilians are buying and have the same usage that my drone has, ability to film and go into areas that you can't reach. But they're not under any restrictions. The first person they come in as law enforcement, let's make sure that they're doing it right, are the first responders in the FDNY. The focus has got to go back where it belongs. Get it off our back and put it back on where it belongs, on the bad people, not on the good people who are trying to protect you.
Thanks, Commissioner. I yield back.
The gentleman's time's expired. I now recognize my good friend from the state of New Jersey, Mr. Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. Thank you for convening today's hearing and allowing me to wave on to discuss a topic that's so important to my district, which sits right across the river in New Jersey, this region, our country. To our witnesses, thank you all for coming. Thank you for your service. To the museum staff, thank you for hosting us today. To the Port Authority on whose campus we sit, who I consider family. It's a privilege to be here with you today and yesterday as we commemorate this 22nd anniversary of 9/11 and also remember the lives lost in 1993. In remembering and honoring the lives lost, we must commit ourselves to the work that remains to preventing future tragedies. As the chairman and ranking member and other colleagues have touched on, we approach these challenges not as Republicans or as Democrats, but as Americans. And that's how we're going to solve these challenges, by doing it together. So I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here today. The events of September 11th prompted sweeping changes to how our nation considers the global threat landscape. While our cyber and technological capabilities have evolved significantly since 2001, so have those of our adversaries. As a nation, we must ensure that our efforts to improve counterterrorism post 9/11 keep pace in order to keep Americans safe. This requires continued development of innovative cyber capabilities that can detect and counter cyber threats, ransomware attacks, unwanted digital intrusions, and other attacks. As representatives of entities that safeguard people, vital networks, and critical infrastructure, many of you are at the forefront of this fight. Deputy Commissioner Weiner and Mr. Erie, how have the terrorism threats your organizations encounter evolved in the cybersecurity landscape, and how do your organizations utilize federal resources to deploy cyber defense measures? Deputy Commissioner Will, you go first.
Thank you. Another area of tremendous growth, and here the technological revolution that has occurred in the 22 years since 9/11 have worked in ways that my co-witnesses have described to empower law enforcement to combat threat. And again, that goes back to having the support from the federal government to continue funding to improve our own capabilities internally. Our Information Technology Bureau spends a tremendous amount of time and resources. I mentioned our domain awareness system that helps us understand threats, whether that's threats on the city streets or threats to our own internet footprint and infrastructure and digital footprint. We rely tremendously on technology. We leverage it to combat threat. We leverage it to do everything that we do. That needs to be done safely. And so UASI grants in particular have been instrumental in creating cybersecurity capabilities in our department that allow us to continue our operations. The adversaries' playing field has also improved, unfortunately, over the last 2 decades. And, we discussed artificial intelligence briefly, but here is an element where the cyber threat landscape is about to really change and to continue the trajectory that has been ongoing in recent years. The threats are often not new, certainly in terms of cyber threat vector. What's different is the opportunity that AI allows to conduct them at scale and at cost.
So we'll need additional coordination between local actors and the federal government, considering how quickly evolving that landscape is.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate you flagging that. I want to give Mr. Erie a chance to discuss cybersecurity at the Port Authority.
No, absolutely. And as always, Commissioner Weiner has it correct. It's a delta that's growing as we've watched and worked to keep that delta closed. When we think of physical security, the cyber world, especially with the burgeoning AI issue, is just vastly outstripping our ability to deal with it at this point. The grants are critically important, and that interaction you're talking about between the local and the state and the federal governments and the ability to collaborate on that is going to be absolutely critical. We are starting to see pieces through the intel world, ChatGPT, AI, asking it, what's the best terrorist attack? What's the best target? And you have something at the speed of light, the studies over that piece of terrorism where there was planning can be speeded up now through these usage of that. So as our ability to address that is something we're working on. We focus on the technology piece. We depend on the federal government for the funding for that and for that collaboration.
And we are partners in that, and our colleague Andrew Garbarino chairs the cybersecurity subcommittee. Would love to have you down, and because it's something that we are laser focused on. Just one more quick question. Our first responders often faced with challenging and unique circumstances, especially in these densely populated districts like the ones that we have the honor of representing. In just one example, this July, a fire broke out on a cargo ship in the Port of Newark in New Jersey's 8th Congressional District. Despite the unfamiliar terrain, firefighters did what firefighters do, and 2 firefighters from Newark's fire department lost their lives responding to that fire. Urban areas present unique challenges for our first response in a security scenario. Commissioner Kavanaugh and anyone else that would like to speak on it, how does it help first responders to have specific funds dedicated to addressing the unique security challenges presented by urban areas, some of which are covered by the Urban Area Security Initiative? Thank you.
Absolutely. As you mentioned, that tragic fire in Newark, broke our hearts. Also an example of collaboration, though. We sent over our specialized rescue units, and they were able to find those 2 firefighters and pull them out so that their colleagues could begin to mourn them. And I can't emphasize enough how much, the theme of this hearing has been bipartisan, and that's the same for us, too. All of the training that we do because of the complexity of this city, because it requires us to always be on top of new technology to train regularly, is a national asset. Our teams have gone to, I think, almost every state represented up here. And so, this is, while it's New York is certainly the main target, this is not a New York problem alone, but it's also not a New York solution. The assets that we build, the technology that we build, and the people that we train are, uniquely qualified because of the challenges of our city to go out and help their fellow Americans wherever an emergency may be.
Thank you. And thank you again, Chairman, for allowing me to wave on. I yield back.
The gentleman's time's expired. I now recognize fellow first responder, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the staff and especially the members from New York. Y'all have been great hosts. You might tell I'm from also across the river. I'm across the Tennessee River, okay, but it's an honor to be here with you. He mentioned first responder. My father was a 23-year fire chief. Inspired me. 39 years myself, from a junior firefighter to assistant chief. 4 commissioners and a chief. I'm honored to be here before you. You think about it, a lot has changed in 22 years, from VHF radios, UHF radios, to digital interoperability. That's what we learned from this. It's unbelievable how many lives have been saved. Ms. Weiner, you mentioned you were a grant, I think, of $120 million. Does it concern you that the mayor, Mayor Adams, is considering cuts because of so many illegal aliens coming to New York?
As we are here today and think through all of the terrific collaboration that has sustained our operations here, and all of the other issues that are confounding our government, whether it's federal agencies dealing with other problems now, great power conflict problems, or our city, which is grappling with humanitarian crisis involving migrants, the funding that we've just been talking about to support our counterterrorism operations here, and to make sure that as we navigate collectively all of these other priority areas, we do not forget our counterterrorism operations, is critically important. So again, federal funds are what allow us to continue to do that and to make sure that September 12th, 2023 is a reminder that we will never go back to September 12th of 2001.
Thank you, I agree. I stand amazed after 22 years to see how many people have chosen careers in the U.S. military, police, paramedics, and firefighters. That's the one thing that really stood out, especially yesterday. In 2020, immigration and enforcement spending totaled about $4 billion across departments and agencies that today make up the Department of Homeland Security. President Biden's fiscal year 2024 budget request for immigration enforcement was $25 billion. I think Americans would agree that we haven't seen a proportionate increase in immigration enforcement, particularly in the last 2 years. Ms. Weiner, do you think this administration's immigration and border crisis has diverted valuable time and resources away from our national security mission?
You know, the fidelity that we apply to the counterterrorism ecosystem here in the city and across the country sustains our ability to protect the city. That's critically important for all the reasons that we've just been talking about. And, you know, I'm not in a position to say what is or isn't a diversion. Unfortunately, we're in a period of time globally, not just in this country, but around the world, where we have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have a number of competing issues that we have to deal with adroitly. And so from where we sit here in this space on this day, we understand the importance of continuing our posture on these issues.
Thank you. Commissioner Ryder, your testimony, you testified about taking away the rights of law enforcement to fly drones. Would it surprise you that the Mexican cartel is flying 17 drones for every one flown by U.S. Border Patrol?
Absolutely not. Of course they are. And that's why, again, we have to be right every time. They only have to be right once. They're practicing every day. They're drilling every day. They come up with new ideas. They got nothing to do but wake up every morning and figure out how they're going to mess with the system. We have to go to work every day and make sure the system works.
Would it surprise you that the Secretary of Homeland Security continues to tell the American people that he has operational control of the southern border?
From my personal opinion, there's very little control of that border right now.
I totally agree. I'm from Rocket City, USA, Huntsville, Alabama. We have the ability to jam or drop these drones. This administration allows them to fly freely in U.S. airspace, and we cannot tolerate that any longer. Our homeland is under attack once again at the southern border, and you start looking at this, first responders, each of you and the people that work under your direction sees it every day. I've worked over 200 overdoses myself. we're watching as fentanyl is killing a generation of Americans, and something has got to be done about it. Illegal immigration, fentanyl poisoning, human smuggling, this border failure is not a Republican issue. It is not a Democratic issue. It is an American issue. And it is time that it be addressed. You look at it, America deserves better. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Burkeen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be with you all. Ground zero here today. The very existence of this committee is a result of what happened here 22 years ago. I think most of us remember well where we were at. It's inspiring to hear the stories of those of you that were here, not just watching it like many of us in TV from Oklahoma, but we're actually responding. And your courage and your bravery was an inspiration to our country. I think there's a lot of us that remember the unity that existed in those days after. And we're a nation that's in need of that. With that said, there are problems we have to work through. Today's mission, the mission statement before us is the evolving threat. And, you know, you've got a Democrat mayor who last week said we're now getting people talking about the illegal immigration situation that New York is experiencing. So we're getting people from West Africa, we're getting people from all over the globe that made up their minds that they're going to come through the southern border and come into New York City. That same Democrat New York City mayor also said that it's about 10,000 a month that are coming to your city. And so as we look at the mission of today's hearing, the evolving threat, I would feel derelict in my duty representing Oklahoma if I didn't in New York City, knowing that you have people that are here that have not gone through the same scrutiny that they go through when they're flying in and they have to present documentation. I think we have to face the reality that there is a threat that is here. And as many of you have said, New York City is unique because of its density of population, that you are a target. And so it is uncomfortable. How do we talk to one another when there's such, you know, differences in ideology, but also, you know, focus on the things we have to be focused on? How do we keep people who hate America from repeating heinous behavior? I want to ask you, Mr. Erie, it's incredible to know all that you actually represent with, you know, as lead security officer for the Port Authority, the number of bridges, 5 airports, I think you said, are under your inspection, 8,500 surveillance cameras that you all have in operation, trying to watch what's going on. What is occurring with 100,000 more people in this city? What are you all doing, and what is your advice to other cities as we make sure that we are trying to be wise in stopping another 9/11 type activity, whether it's you know, to the same level or smaller level, whether it's cybersecurity? What actions are you all taking with the grant funding with this illegal immigration situation, you know, front and center in New York City?
Thank you for the question. We here at the port, obviously, and as has been said, we're in dealing with a humanitarian challenge with people coming here, like many states and many cities. The port, you know, supports as best we can both the state and the city's efforts to house and to vet these individuals when they come here. From a security standpoint, we do, I won't say numbers are often irrelevant, but we look at the challenge every way. We deal with it collaboratively. We talk with our intel partners. We do the best we can with the technology, catching up with that. But it's a concern. You know, more people of any stripe coming to the city, much like today or yesterday when we had the festivities and the commemorations here to think about the attacks that happened on 9/11. People come here, and it's a flooded area, and we have to take those security precautions. But we do rely on that funding to allow us, as you mentioned, the technology that not only here at the port but throughout the city that we have, the camera systems, the security alarms, the biological alarms. They're all in place to deal with that, and we look at that stepping up. If there's more visitors that come to our facilities, we appreciate that as the city does, but we do take our security concerns just as seriously.
Yeah, Mr. Ryder, the failure of the intelligence community. You cited it's come up another time. Powerful statement that you said that, you know, the bad guys only have to be right once. We have to be right every time. What are your comments? We know that we apprehended 98 people on the terrorist watch list 2 years ago. We've already apprehended 100 people coming across the southern border on the terrorist watch list. But what about those that didn't? What about those who have gotten across without the documentation, that may have been caught through other screenings, that are now potentially in New York City? What are your thoughts on this?
I am a child of immigrants. My parents came from this country, from Ireland, came through Ellis Island on the Queen Elizabeth at the time. We are a country that welcomes all. But a process has to be in place. You won't walk into an NBC building, a CBS building, a Fox building without going through a security process, controlled access. And then there's a vetting process. Show your ID and we'll give you back, and at the end of the day, you get it back when you walk out. There's no controlled access at the border, so we don't know who's coming through that border. That makes my job and the commissioner's job harder. I have to vet the normal domestic terrorist people that are evolving in this country. Now I got to take everything from around the world that's coming through the border with no vetting process and now try to figure out who's going to be my next potential target. How many hundreds have gotten through that border already that are building up right now to do an attack on our country? We don't know it. And you know what? But because of the great work that we're doing on this side of the table and the support that we're getting, we're going to try to stay on top of that and make sure that the people are safe.
Thank you. I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
The gentleman's time's expired.
I yield from 1 minute just to respond to that. I would just like to point out, first of all, this is about 9/11, and I hope we can continue to focus on this. But the migrants who have come to New York City have been vetted. Nearly every single one has come through a port of entry and has been vetted and has gone through that process, and that's part of the reason why there has been so little criminal activity from those 100,000 plus that have come here. Thank you for your indulgence.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Malliotakis.
First, I want to thank each and every one of you for your service to our state. I want to thank the chairman, for Anthony D'Esposito, for his service to our city as a former NYPD detective. And I want to say that this is about 9/11, and it is about preventing the next terrorist attack. And that is why we have a responsibility as members of Congress to make sure that our homeland is secure, and that includes our borders. And that includes making sure that the Department of Homeland Security does not have an open border process that is allowing millions of people to enter into our country. With that said, I am very concerned about DHS, which was created post 9/11. TSA, which is under the DHS, allowing individuals to use warrants to board aircrafts, completely against the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. But here locally, we should be talking about the people that we don't know about. You mentioned we know that there are about 7.4 million. Does the NYPD vet those individuals? The ones that do come to New York City?
We rely on our federal partners for screening individuals, and you mentioned individuals who had been turned away or apprehended, who would be part of our terrorist screening database.
Does NYPD cooperate with federal detainer requests?
So NYPD, in terms of criminal enforcement, and you're referring to sanctuary city policies and our ability to partner with Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection, and in the context, which is where I operate, of crime investigation and prevention, we cooperate extensively.
Extensively,
with
you
ICE.
do. However, does the City of New York prohibit NYPD from cooperating with federal detainer requests? Because the last that I saw, out of all the retainer requests this year, last year, and the year prior, there was zero cooperation.
In civil enforcement, that's where this policy comes to play. However, in terms of protecting our city from crime, that's where the cooperation and the collaboration is robust and ongoing, and we work extensively with those agencies.
Okay. Well, and I would like to say that, for the record, that there have been dozens of individuals that are currently here in the current shelter system created by our mayor for migrants that have been arrested and released back onto our streets because my colleague says that they're vetted and everything's great. I also want to point out that there's 1.6 million individuals who have had zero interaction with any government official that have entered our southern border. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are. Does that concern you?
I think what's happening at the border is certainly of concern. It's of concern in many different dimensions. There's a humanitarian crisis in this city, one that requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of funding and support. From a security perspective, which is my purview, it absolutely does. And I think one of the issues I wanted to flag was tremendous partnership and cooperation with federal agencies surrounding some of the networks, human smuggling networks related to individuals from Uzbekistan. And, you know, there were press reports recently around links to ISIS of some of those individuals. Yes. And so that vetting and that intelligence and those partnerships that we have come to rely on in terms of our ability to investigate threats have allowed us, working collaboratively with our Joint Terrorism Task Force officers, NYPD officers assigned to those task forces.
You mentioned the federal partners that investigate the human smuggling network as it relates to ISIS. The FBI reported that those individuals were already in the country, so they were able to somehow get in despite this great vetting process that my colleague says exists. But aside from that, I'm concerned about the 1.6 million gotaways that have had zero interaction, that are in our country. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. That is my greatest concern. We caught 250 individuals over this fiscal year and last fiscal year at the border. That's great. But what about the 1.6 million? Mr. Ryder, Mr. Erie, does that concern you?
Much like the commissioner said, from a security professional's point of view, of course, it concerns me. But as we deal with this humanitarian crisis, we need to get our arms around that and what's going on at the border and these folks coming into the country.
Mr. Ryder?
Absolutely, it concerns me.
Well, I want to thank you all for what you're doing. And again, your job is being made difficult by what is going on at our border, that the Department of Homeland Security was created to keep our interior secure. So that's what we should all be focused on in Congress, is making sure you have the tools and resources, but that the policies of this administration, this Congress, are in place to actually help you do your job, not make it more difficult, because you shouldn't have to divert all these resources from the current threats by think there's 1.6 million people in the country. We don't know who they are, where they are, and what they're planning. And that I think is the number one thing that we should be concerned with. I yield back to my colleagues, and I thank you for allowing me to participate in this important hearing.
The gentlewoman yields. The chair now recognizes Mr. Molinaro from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to wave on to the subcommittee. I, too, have been serving in the state of New York in local government and as an emergency responder for the last 30 years. I, too, recall early that morning 22 years ago a plane flying low above the Hudson River, wondering what exactly was going on here from my viewpoint in the Hudson River Valley, only to a few moments later realize that indeed was a plane headed toward this very location. I'm grateful, certainly to all of you, to service to the city of New York, the region, and of course the state. Mr. Chairman, thank you for your own service, sacrifice, and heroism in service to your community and the city of New York. Deputy Commissioner Pfeiffer, you had, and thank you, by the way, for your leadership. I had the pleasure of sitting through several of your leadership training seminars as a county executive. You spoke after 9/11 of the efforts within the city of New York to collect more data, to implement technology that would allow for greater sharing of data, communication, interoperability. Have we achieved the goal of adequate interoperability and data sharing within the City of New York agencies?
We're constantly trying to improve on that. There's no doubt we're totally different than we were 22 years ago, but we are improving on that. And we need funding for technologies So think of this. If I take out my phone and I swipe to the left, I get my camera. Well, what happens if I swipe to the right and I could get a locator? So our people within high-rise buildings or in any building, if they get in trouble, they swipe right and they could get a locator. The same thing we're looking for firefighters and other first responders to be able to track them where they are, so when they get in trouble, get in dangerous situations, we can provide help. So to your answer, we're expanding our ability to communicate with each other.
But we have significant needs to improve on that interoperability. Commissioner Ryder, to expand beyond the city of New York, this state and this country is made up by countless emergency responder agencies. Would you say on Long Island that there is adequate interoperability and communication among police agencies and fire agencies, volunteer and career? Have we met the task of the 9/11 commissions pointing that we lacked imagination? Have we gotten to the point where that technology has met the need, or do we still have advancements
We
necessary?
have gotten better, but we need to go further. We're very unique in Nassau County. I believe there's 72 fire agencies, 72 fire agencies alone, and they all have their own fiefdom, if you will, what they control. And then law enforcement has theirs with another 19 village police departments in 2 cities. So it's complicated, but yes, we've gotten better in our communications. We're able to communicate with our villages. I'm able to communicate with the NYPD on the border, and of course Suffolk County to my east.
Thank you, Commissioner. I only because I have no idea how much time I have left. Ms.
You have a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Weiner, is there adequate vetting by the federal government of the migrants, immigrants, individuals, undocumented, that are not now under the care of the city of New York? Is there adequate vetting? Yes or no?
This is the challenge of our time.
No, I understand,
and
Ms. Weiner.
It's why we do what we do all day.
Ms. Weiner, has there been adequate vetting so that the communication sharing that exists is sufficient for the city of New York to know who and what individuals are dealing with, and then share that information with other agencies? Is that adequate? Ms. Weiner, I apologize. Is the federal government vetting adequate?
If everybody had a crystal ball and was able to understand the dimensions of these people,
Ms. Weiner,
and this
I appreciate the sentence. I really do, and I'm not trying to cause any conflict. I believe that it is inadequate. Commissioner Ryder, would you suggest, knowing that the city of New York, under Mayor Adams' policy of moving individuals to other parts of the state, would you say that there is adequate sharing of criminal background, health concerns, risk as those individuals are moved to communities beyond the city of New York?
If anybody has moved to Nassau County, we received no information on it whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder, Commissioner Ryder. 2 things. Certainly, as Mayor Adams said only days ago, we are dealing with a crisis that will, in quotes, destroy the city of New York. Now, whether that's hyperbole or rhetoric, I really don't care. What I do care about is that the lessons we learned 22 years ago, or were to have learned 22 years ago, is that a porous border, that access to flight training, that being able to access documents and identification in order to conduct and orchestrate an attack on this country was far too easy then than we hope it is today. However, adequate or inadequate response at the border would suggest to us, inadequate background check and vetting would suggest to us that we are open to some risk today. And that, to me, is alarming and concerning, and ought to be to all Americans, not because we don't care about the individuals we do. It was my responsibility as a county leader to locate a residence shelter, but there's a concern here. Mr. Chairman, I just want to end, and I apologize. The reason I point to the inadequate, and I think that we've made advances, but we have not adequately created interoperability and joint communication beyond regional agencies, is because this state participates, as several do, not many, as several do, Mr. Chairman, in collecting, as every state does, thanks to the FCC, a surcharge on cellular phones. This state redirects those that surcharge, millions upon millions of dollars that should be getting to agencies on the ground, like the Port Authority, like FDNY, like the Nassau police agencies and fire agencies. They redirect that aid that was meant to create interoperability and communication to general fund obligations. I believe that that is a failure of significant magnitude that is limiting our capacity to protect the homeland and to provide emergency responders with the tools necessary to respond here in our community and our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time's expired. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. I think this was a meaningful subcommittee hearing and obviously a place that holds so much meaning to many of us. I also want to thank the staff here at the museum and the staff from Homeland Security for the great job that they did in organizing this hearing. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask the witness to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, this subcommittee stands adjourned.